Hey, what's going on, guys? I'm Quinn Clark from throtl. Today we got our 4G63 turbo engine out of our 98 Eclipse GSX. We're going to be doing a full teardown on this thing. I'm going to be doing the first in-house engine build here at throtl, so stay tuned for future videos on this motor specifically. And for now, let's get this thing torn apart. All right, so to start, we need to get all of our intake manifold, exhaust manifold, and accessories off. They pulled this motor out pretty much complete, so we need to get this thing down to a bare long block to start disassembling it. We're gonna start with the intake manifold and kind of work our way around the side of the engine. When we're pulling off bigger stuff like the manifolds, I kind of like to keep everything together. So I'll pull the intake manifold, the throttle body, some coolant hoses, and the ignition coil and assembly kind of all out as one unit. So just cracking the intake manifold hardware from underneath, taking off some of the vacuum lines. And just like that, our intake manifold can come off, and the ignition coils and wires and throttle body and all that stuff are with it. So we can pull the gasket off now. So there's the intake ports. And then just wrap around the side, I'm gonna start taking off some of the cooling lines for the turbocharger and try and get that thermostat housing off. Now we're going to take off the entire thermostat housing assembly. We are going to be reusing the assembly. We are going to be replacing the thermostat. I did want to take the thermostat off just to take a look at it and make sure that the housing wasn't too pitted on the inside, as well as the housing assembly itself. You can see there's a little bit of buildup and crust on the inside. Just getting the hardware off. I wanted to pull that entire unit off as one thing. So now we're going to take the turbo off, taking some of the cooling lines and the oil lines off. Even though we did drain the engine and the coolant out of the engine, there is still fluids kind of throughout the rest of the engine. You can't really get all of it out. So draining the feed line, I'm cracking the oil filter here because we're going to be taking the oil filter housing off. I did want to get as much oil out of it as we can so it's not sitting there leaking on the table. So I drain the filter, throw the filter back on so it doesn't leak that much. I went to take the turbo drain line off, and the AN fittings inside really don't like to twist. Even though it is a silicone hose, those lines are going in pretty deep, so I just took the entire unit off as one. So now we're going to start taking the turbo manifold off, taking the hardware off, again taking things off in bigger chunks. I did want to pull the entire manifold and turbo system off as one. This turbo setup did not have an additional bracket holding the weight of the turbo, so it's just the exhaust manifold holding the turbo up. And the entire turbo manifold system will come off as one with some of the cooling lines for the turbo. There's the exhaust side of the cylinder head, and our turbo and intake manifold assemblies are out. So now we can start taking the engine accessories off. A lot of these older engines, especially JDM engines, use the accessories as the belt tensioner. So you can see the alternator is pivoting on its lower bolt there. So the power steering pump and the alternator actually act as the tensioner for these engines. They don't have a standalone belt tensioner. Power steering pump coming off. Now we can remove the power steering pump bracket. And now we're just going to take off the remainder of the cooling lines and hoses that are on the side. You'll notice when I pull this one out that there's a lot of coolant coming out. So the oil filter housing that the oil filter actually slides onto is a liquid oil cooler for this engine. So it uses a liquid to liquid cooler, so it doesn't have an air to liquid cooler. I'm pulling off that line that goes from the water pump to the thermostat housing, and then we can crack the coolant line off for the turbo. So going after the timing covers now, we got to pull the water pump pulleys off. That pump is driven by two different pulleys in case one fails. So we can get the timing covers off. So that timing cover was actually being blocked by the motor mount studs. So I tried to take off the lower cover to see if it would make getting that upper cover off easier. These are pretty straightforward. They just have a bunch of 10mm bolts kind of all around on different spots around the cover. So I got the lower cover off, and it really didn't help me get the upper cover off, so I decided to pull the engine mount studs off. So those studs are actually threaded into that bracket. So what I did to get the stud out is I threaded one of the nuts on upside down and then threaded the other nut on right side up. And if you tighten the two nuts against each other, and then you can use the lower nut to back the entire stud off. And then just like that, the upper cover comes off. So I wanted to take the valve cover off before we got the timing belt assembly off, just to get a good look at the inside of the cylinder head. It also kind of confirms when you're at TDC, it's a little bit easier to see what the cams are doing as you're going through disassembling the timing system. These do have a little bit weirder timing belt systems than a normal 4-cylinder would, because they do have two counter shafts. So just pulling the valve cover off, the gasket wasn't too bad. It was a little bit cracked, but it wasn't leaking, so definitely not the worst valve cover gasket I've seen from an engine this old. So because we're going to be rotating the engine to TDC, I did want to get the spark plugs out, so that way I'm not fighting the engine compression to disassemble the timing system. So now I got the motor spun to top dead center, so we're going to start taking off the timing belt tensioner. The timing belt pulley, as you can see I'm undoing there, is actually oblong, so it kind of rotates into the timing belt, so it kind of preloads the tensioner. So we got the belt off. Now we're going to start going after the dust covers on the back of the engine. So there's one of the back covers. So I'm going to take the tensioner off of the engine mount bracket here, as well as dismounting the engine mount bracket, so that just slides off the bracket there. And I'm threading the hardware back on. I kind of like to keep the hardware with the brackets that they go with, just kind of keeps track of the hardware a little bit better. So we're taking the bracket off, bracket comes off, and now I can go after the dust plate behind that bracket. So now we're going to disassemble the cam, so I do have to take the angle sensor off the back. There is a bolt inside of the angle sensor, so just taking that off, and then our whole angle sensor assembly can come off. So now we're going to start going after the camshafts. So I cracked them all loose initially, and then I went across back and forth, starting from the middle out to loosen the nuts to kind of work the cam caps up evenly. Taking the cam caps off one at a time down the line is really not the way to do it. So we got the intake cam out, and you'll see me kind of crack them all loose when we go for the exhaust side, and then kind of work back and forth across the whole plane of the cam to evenly bring it up. So back and forth, starting from the middle out, and usually when the cam caps are loose, then you can go ahead and just take them off all down in a line like that. And just like that, the exhaust camshaft is out. So now we're going to pull off our rockers and lifters. We are going to be replacing the valve springs, keepers, and installing a new set of cams. That being said, I still wanted to install the lifters and the rockers in the orientation and the same position in the cylinder head that they came out of. So I've got a little tray over there that I'm putting them in a way that I can kind of keep track of where each one went. So now we're going to start cracking the cylinder head bolts. You do want to crack these in the same sequence that the cylinder head is installed in. So I started in the middle and just kind of cracked them on the way out. So again, working from the inside out, just cracking them loose. And now that they were all loose, we can go ahead and rip them off with the speed handle. So you don't necessarily need to pull the bolts out of the cylinder head to take the cylinder head off. I just find it's a little bit cleaner, because then when you pull the head off, you don't have, 10 or 14 or however many bolts the head has all hanging out from the bottom making noise. All right, so we got our timing belts off, our camshafts out, lifters, rockers out, the head bolts are out. We are going to see the inside of this motor for the first time since 1998, when this thing was brand new. As far as I know, this thing has never been rebuilt. Yeah, not bad.
Is this little head gasket in here?
Probably just a little bit of RTV.
Look.
Oh geez, what is that?
Still intact?
This thing ran pretty well, so nothing really major wrong with it. Everything looks pretty consistent with mileage. Just a little dirty. Nothing major. So that's buildup. That's what happens when coolant degrades over time. So if you don't regularly maintain your car or your cooling system, change your coolant out every 2 or 3 years, you get a lot of buildup stuff. Also, if you run hard water, you'll get contamination like that as well. All right, so now we're going to start taking off the water pump assembly. This does have the alternator tensioner bracket on it. We're going to leave that tensioner bracket on the water pump itself for now. Just trying to crack the gasket loose. And now we can take off that bracket. Now we're going to start going after the crank pulley. So the main timing belt pulley can come off. That is a little tensioner belt for one of the counter shafts. So it has 2 counter shafts, and that counter shaft has its own little belt. And so there's the oil filter housing coming off. We can pull that last pulley off for the counter shaft belt. Trying to crack the gasket loose here.
Splash zone.
And and then we can rotate the block upside down. As you can see, there's still a lot of fluids in the motor. And now we can start ripping off the oil pan. So all of our tin comes off. I kind of smack it with a little bit of a hammer to crack the gasket, and the oil pan comes off pretty nicely. Now we can start taking off the baffle for the oil pan. And now we can pull the pickup for the oil pump off. The baffle will come out, and just pulling out some last plugs for the balance shafts. Still in there trying to crack the gasket loose. And then the entire oil pump and both of our counter shafts will come out. A common mod for the 4Gs is actually deleting those counter shafts. I think you can pick up 5 to 10 horsepower by deleting them. This is going to be a street car. They do add NVH, which is noise, vibration, and harshness, by deleting those counter shafts. We do want a good, smooth driving street engine out of this, so I think we're going to leave those counter shafts in place. And there's the entire rotating assembly going to work. One of the things that the 4Gs has, if you'll notice, is all of the main bearings are connected by a single cradle. And that's one of the factors that makes these little 4-cylinders very strong, is the fact that the entire short block is braced by the main cap. There's cylinder number 1, piston coming out. So we're going to take its sister piston out, which is cylinder number 4. So main cap comes off, and then we can slide the piston down, rotate the crank, and I can get my little rubber mallet in there to bang it out through the bottom and pop the piston out the bottom. So there is piston number 4. Now we can rotate the crank to bottom dead center for 2 and 3, and then get those cylinders out. Cracking them loose. Get in there with the speed handle and take the bearing cap off. We can rotate it out of the way, get the hammer in there, and then cylinder number 2 comes out. It's going to be the same operation for cylinder number 3. Get our nuts off, get our rod cap off. Now the bearing actually popped out. You can see it sliding on the crank journal there, and then the rod popped out with that one. So like the cylinder head with the mains, you want to start from the center out, get all of the bolts loose. This one's a little bit more difficult to take out because all of the mains are on a single cradle. They're not individual bearing caps. So we're going to take all of the bolts out, and then it's a little bit harder to work loose because it's one. So I'm kind of knocking it around with the hammer trying to get it to come out, and then they all pop off. And there is our crankshaft. All right, so we got our bottom end completely stripped down. Rods, pistons, main caps are off. Now all we have to do is pull the crankshaft out.
Just like that.
All right, so our 4G63 is completely torn apart. We have a bare block. We have a lot of parts to send out to the machine shop and a lot of parts to clean before we can start putting this thing back together. If you guys like what you see, comment down below and subscribe, and we will see you guys in the next one.